Hey folks, I'm really excited to share this video with you. Here, I present my career story and I briefly perform stand-up comedy for students at the Student National Pharmaceutical Association chapters of Howard University and Hampton University. I'm very grateful to be involved with their mental health initiative. Thank you so much and enjoy!
Full transparency, I see a therapist once to twice every 3 weeks. I definitely am a super advocate for mental health, and tonight we will be speaking with Dr. Mudit Verma. He is also a pharmacist, but on the side he does comedy, so we're definitely going to share some laughs tonight. Dr. Verma is a 2018 graduate of University of Maryland School of Pharmacy and a 2014 graduate of the University of Maryland College Park, where he earned his Bachelor of Science in Psychology along with a minor in Leadership Studies. He's an educated man. Like myself, Mudit is an avid mental health advocate, and he currently serves as a research/content officer for a mental health advocacy group focused on eliminating stigma against mental illness amongst South Asian communities. Mudit has previously worked as a medical writer for a clinical research organization that serves clients developing novel pharmacological therapies for various psychiatric indications, among engaging in projects with other disease states.
So Mudit has also written for the American Society of Pharmacovigilance regarding his own experiences with medication safety in relation to mental health. Lastly, Mudit is an aspiring stand-up comedian, whose content largely pertains to his South Asian American upbringing and life experience. Mudit has had to pivot his comedy to an online presence during the recent lockdown and loves to learn novel artistic forms of content creation. Ultimately, Mudit strives to continuously inspire the next generation of mental health advocates, which we here at the SNPhA Mental Health Initiative fully support. So, without further ado, Mudit Verma, Dr. Mudit Verma.
Thank you so much, Ayana, and thank you so much, Christina. I am very, very happy to be here. This is my first time presenting to a student group in any capacity, after graduation. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and begin my presentation, and I'll try to keep it short with emphasis on the mental health components and the career components that can benefit all of you the most as students. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we can do some questions if those come up. And then if there's time, I can tell a few jokes and do a short Zoom comedy performance. This presentation I've titled My Career Journey and Mental Health Story. Here's an overview of my presentation today. I'm going to talk about pharmacy school, including before, during, and after, what prompted me to enroll, my journey throughout, and what came after. I'm going to speak about my first job after pharmacy school, which was as a medical writer. And I'll put as much emphasis as I can on that bullet point of medical writing, because that pertains to you all in terms of career opportunities, particularly career opportunities that are feasible, substantial, manifest in like a full-time job space. And then after I worked a year as a medical writer, I'll talk about my journey in political engagement and civic engagement, continuing mental health advocacy, and then what prompted me to go for stand-up comedy and moving forward. I graduated from College Park, University of Maryland College Park, majoring in psychology, and I minored in leadership studies. That prompted my very strong interest in mental health overall. I think that when I started undergrad, I wasn't sure what sort of a provider I wanted to be, whether it was something along the lines of a talk therapist or a counselor, more of the psychology space, or another sort of clinician in the medicinal space. During my time at undergrad, I joined a student chapter of a mental health advocacy group called Active Minds. It was a great introduction to the landscape of resources, professional resources for mental health. I was excited to pursue pharmacy school because there wasn't a whole lot of specialties that I was aware of before starting pharmacy school, that pharmacists engage in with mental health. I was sort of in this frame of mind of like embarking on a new frontier. And this last point of cultural and social factors, which informed my decision to pursue pharmacy school. So I'm an only child. I'm a son of two Indian immigrants that are now citizens. Both my parents are PhD trained scientists. So they're in the space of life sciences, and that had implications on kind of my upbringing as well as my career choices and the expression of said choices moving forward. Pharmacy seemed to encapsulate, no pun intended, kind of the prestige of like the medical profession or the clinical professions overall. So I'm going to go through each of my years in pharmacy school and share with you my experiences. Hopefully that I can tie in some advice that can help all of you. First year, I was a class president. It was a very eye-opening experience. It was very intense. I was very thankful to have earned that position of class president. My biggest takeaway for that level of leadership is to really advocate for the group, including those with challenges that may be unique relative to the rest of the class. I think what made me stick out as class president was my mental health advocacy in particular. The faculty prioritized the majority of the class and the perceived needs of bulk level kind of population of pharmacy students. I think what made my class president, a year-long tenure unique is that I really tried to advocate for students with unique needs, perhaps issues pertaining to mental health, so that those voices could be heard as well. So not surprisingly, I also served as co-historian of the College of Psychiatric and Neurologic Pharmacists, the student chapter. I think that, the biggest thing in my P1 year was understanding the importance or kind of calibrating my own time and energy according to like the sheer high number of student organizations. I would say, again, a key personality difference of mine, maybe during my pharmacy school career and like the greater pharmacy community, was I really did speak up for students that were struggling, whether it was academically, personally, socially. I think adjusting to the expectations of leadership in the particular pharmacy school I went to was a bit of a challenge. I think undergrad, especially as a psychology major, primed me to really speak up, to really advocate, even in instances where that might disrupt kind of the flow of priorities, perhaps among higher ups, whether it was students in higher years, teaching assistants, professors. I kind of went against the grain. P2 year, I served as a university fellow on a project on cultural competence. And I highlighted that because P2 year really characterized my kind of deviance from pharmacy school specific organizations to broader university involvement. It was around this time where I knew I did not want to do something traditional in terms of maybe like the conventional careers that are in place for licensed practicing pharmacists, namely community. And even I was starting to get an inkling of doubt on my ability to pursue residency in a healthy and sound fashion, knowing my own needs and knowing the high demand for residents and frankly, even some fellowships, depending on the type. My P2 year, it was characterized by this open-ended kind of involvement with the university. If you're involved and fulfilled with your pharmacy student organizations, that is fantastic. Keep on doing what you're doing. In the event that you may not be, or if you have a friend that may not be, seek out involvement opportunities that may be on the campus level or even the community level based on the DC area geography. If there's a way to get the name of your school of pharmacy in a different organization and to have that crossover, perhaps with this like interprofessional touch, I would advocate for that measure. In the fall of 2016, where that characterized the time period in which I experienced very severe mental health issues. In the summer prior to my P3 year, after completing an internship and starting one of my rotations, I paid a number of visits to the campus counseling center to essentially, I needed help open-endedly. I didn't know that I had a particular problem going into the counseling center. I just knew that at the time, my grades were not where they needed to be. The bulk of my pharmacy school career up to that point was characterized by like studying and frankly cramming. The time and energy consumed for student involvement was so high, I was losing a sense of direction. There were bursts of fulfillment during my P2 year, but the bulk of it was just this level of exhaustion and misery. So I paid a visit to my campus counseling center. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with a generalized anxiety disorder, asked if I'd be willing to take medication. And I said, yeah, as a pharmacy student, I also kind of perceived the level of significance in that, I'm learning about these medications. Let's give this therapy a try to help solve my own problems. I was prescribed sertraline, traditionally antidepressant, more connotatively an antidepressant, sertraline or Zoloft, relatively high dose. I adjusted to it. These SSRIs take a few weeks to adjust to. So it took me a month to adjust to. And then I think the sertraline kicked in the way it was possibly intended to in September of 2016, which was the start of my P3 year. The start of my P3 year, the first couple of weeks of September, I felt better. The anxiety went away. I felt more confident. I felt more outspoken. I felt more comfortable in social situations. I was speaking up a lot in class. I remember we had a leadership and management course that was mandatory, in our P3 year. And the first lecture was on this very open-ended kind of take on leadership. It was very heavy on, I guess, buzzwords and maybe like broader references. Whereas at the end of the course, you're more so learning the workflow and responsibilities of typically a community pharmacist and kind of the more nitty gritty. I was speaking up a lot in class and kind of contesting some of the points the professors made. Some of the instances in which my classmates were on my side. I particularly remember where there was a slide in place where the slide had an image of maybe a magazine cover, and it said something very broad that was like, success is leadership combined with a little bit of luck. And I don't know who was on the cover, but it was some sort of it was a white man, very, I guess, Hollywood looking. And I spoke up during that slide, which was, it was like a minute or two dedicated to like talking about the importance of luck. And I made a statement and conveying that perhaps the professor is conflating what he describes as luck as what really is privilege. I think that, this ties into me taking sertraline, because I would have never had the propensity to speak up like this had I not been taking this medication. I've never sought professional mental health help before the onset of this P3 year. Unfortunately, the latter 2 weeks, I started experiencing a lot of agitation. My energy levels became uncontrolled to an extent. I was agitated. I was having racing thoughts. I was losing sleep. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but what was happening was I was developing mania. I was developing mania, severe manic episode as a result of adverse effect of sertraline. At the end of September, I had to get admitted to the closest inpatient psychiatric hospital, which is Shepherd Pratt in Hampton, Maryland. It's a psychiatric hospital. I had to spend a night there to kind of get my symptoms under control. And it was a very eye-opening and shocking experience. My friends strategically kind of informed my parents essentially after I got admitted, which was the correct thing to do in the scope of like seeking and committing to, professional help and professional mental health services. However, once my parents discovered where I was, the following Saturday morning, it was extraordinarily shocking to them. They wanted me out as soon as they could get me out of the inpatient unit. This is the first instance in which I was experiencing like a cultural barrier or stigma to the perception of mental health services. However, some of it was justified in the sense that my folks and I talked about the subsequent bills they received, the cost of healthcare. That is a very pertinent issue in all healthcare, both mental health and non-mental health, in the U.S. So that was a very shocking experience. That really prompted me to this very day write publications, speak on podcasts to talk about that very eye-opening experience. Up until this point, I was attending pharmacy school at the main campus in downtown Baltimore. I switched campuses to a channel site, a satellite campus rather, in Shady Grove, which is Rockville, Maryland. Both cohorts took the same classes, had the same professors, had the same exams. You still had to show up to the building, I guess, that you were assigned to. But this prompted me to take a huge step back in terms of my personal kind of independence, my ability to function as an adult, or re-assimilate to maybe just society as a whole. I moved back in with my parents and resumed pharmacy school from home. I'm going to move on to P4 year, which is rotations. P4 year, it was a bit of a turbulent time. I think in retrospect, I could have benefited very strongly from taking time off, taking a gap year of sorts within pharmacy school. I highly doubt that professors would advocate that, but again, mental health is not really, it's not really like this pleasant area of roses type of thing. It's unpleasant. So I'm just taking a moment to read the chat. Thank you all so much. This means a lot. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that. I feel like very strongly that I would have benefited from taking time off from pharmacy school, which in pharmacy school, it doesn't really take the shape of a semester. The curriculum is so heavily and precisely prescriptive, no pun intended. The course that you take in the fall semester is directly the prerequisite course to the course that you take in the spring semester. And the schools and institutions don't typically offer said course outside of their designated conventional semester. Unlike undergrad, at least where I went to undergrad at College Park, you could take organic chemistry 1 in any of the 4 seasons, any of the four semesters rather, fall, spring, summer, winter. It didn't work that way where I went to pharmacy school, and I would imagine it doesn't work that way with a lot of pharmacy schools. If you need to take time off, take it. I have a friend, a colleague from undergrad that is a psychiatrist, went to Hopkins for medical school. She took a year off to do research within medical school. Rotations were very tough. I was very minimalistic in sort of my broader priorities of P4 year. I really put my grades of the rotations and therefore my performance, my etiquette, my presence at rotations at the top of the priorities. But I really isolated that, because I was so burnt out, from my mental health challenges at P3 year and frankly, just P1 year and P2 year as a whole, that I did not go to mid-year, for example. I didn't bother personally applying to residencies nor fellowships. I do have a slightly unconventional opinion that, the compensation is not adequately justified. And for me and what I am able to handle, I would have been totally overworked. I felt overworked or just, overwhelmed and exhausted in general in pharmacy school. I don't know that if I didn't make some serious changes that any of that would change in my pursuit of a residency or most fellowships. Just as an FYI, that's how I approached P4 year. Some notable rotations. I had a renal transplant rotation in Melbourne, Australia. It was very eye-opening. It was very humbling. It was awesome. It was a great experience interacting with different people, both in the clinic and outside, life outside of rotations in Melbourne, Australia. Then I had a notable rotation at the FDA at the Division of Drug Information. Feel free to reach out to me about that. On the Division of, as you get to rotations and as you apply to special rotations, of which the FDA was in for my pharmacy school, there are a huge number of offices and a huge number of divisions. Couple notes, I would say, for the Division of Drug Information at the FDA, it's a relatively fast-paced division, if you will, at the FDA. I think the FDA and government jobs in particular seem to have this reputation of relatively less stress and or turbulence of jobs in the private sector. That's sort of a broad thing to keep in mind. I will say the Division of Drug Information went against that grain, or it was a busier rotation because you're receiving phone calls from laymen, from the general public, on the documentation of adverse events, if they experienced an adverse event taking either a medication or a supplement of sorts. Students on rotation, they would still receive phone calls from professionals, maybe like industry professionals needing regulatory guidance on perhaps their business. We would be able to take some of those phone calls. Other times we would delegate those phone calls to our preceptors and whatnot. So that's a couple notes on the Division of Drug Information rotation at the FDA. This last bullet point within P4, ensuring a smooth graduation, the requirements for graduation took priority over anything peripheral to that pharmacy school-wise during my P4 year, because all I wanted to do was graduate and graduate smoothly, without any hiccups. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was prioritizing something that was secondary to graduation, such as maybe like involvement in a student org or anything really mid-year. I feel like my bandwidth was spread so thin that if I mix up my priorities, I might miss something or miss a box that needed to be checked for just simply graduating. So there's a lot of fear that I was experiencing. Again, I'm only speaking for myself. A fair number of my classmates were breezing, at least appeared to be, just like pushing right through all these challenges and fostering a level of success and pursuing residencies and fellowships and beyond. This last point of communicating up, I think so. In where I went to pharmacy school, there was a lot of red tape and bureaucratic layers of like communicating to, I guess, course managers, kind of overseeing the logistics and I guess the ultimate grading of a particular course. But you had to communicate your question or concern to a student liaison that was an appointed volunteer. That liaison maybe would use their best judgment to communicate that question or concern to, I guess, a professor that would then report to the course manager, and then you climb the tree. I personally took it upon myself to expedite that whole process. I would email course managers and or professors directly, particularly with courses and rotations, APPEs that pertain to, minimum requirements to graduation, without, I guess, succumbing to the fear of like burning bridges and speaking up too loudly for myself. I think that, I would hope that pharmacy schools, they should have the goal to have their students graduate on time and as smoothly as possible. Students have a very tough lifestyle. I would advocate that if there's something concerning you, speak up about it as soon as you can to your higher ups, like, professors and whatnot. And the reason I say that is simply because when I was in instances where I waited to speak up about my concerns, whether it was about grades, whether it was about communication issues, I would always hear the same response of like, well, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't this come up sooner? And that key word sooner was the thing that I wanted to prophylax against, which is speaking up as quickly as possible and as highly as possible to the person, managing at the top. I was very steadfast on advocating for my own need as a tuition paying student, and I advocate for doing that. Something that was very unique that characterized my pharmacy school experience is that I have had 6 international experiences. It's described pretty thoroughly in an article I wrote for the Pharmacy Times. Some quick notes about after pharmacy school. I started my first job 1 month after pharmacy school, but if I had not gotten that offer, I would have been very happy to like take a bit of a personal sabbatical year off to really understand, hash out my mental health needs, because I was frankly running on empty in the latter 2 years of pharmacy school. While I was still taking these classes and doing the latter year rotations, it was like scrambling to seek therapists, professional help, a compatible psychiatrist. I started my first job a month after graduating pharmacy school. I applied to that particular position in February of 2018. So that's May 2018 is the graduation date. So that's a few months of a turnaround time in terms of applying to jobs and hearing back. I worked as a medical writer for what was a small clinical research organization or contract research organization. The acronym is CRO. The company was called Excelovance. It was very small, located in Rockville, Maryland. I would go to the office from home. I'll try to speak to my specific roles. I have a particular mentor that mentored me all throughout undergrad and perhaps latter portions of high school. He's a physician. We've been connected on LinkedIn ever since. I was, in this process of applying to jobs and leveraging whatever connections I had. I tried to stay active and vocal on LinkedIn as well, expressing my professional interests. I found a job of a medical writer that had a mutual connection, in terms of potential referral for mutual connection. I was initially hesitant to click that button because that would have been, my first time doing so, or it was my first time doing so, clicking that button to request a sort of a referral, or I don't know if that's the precise terminology. That LinkedIn was a big part of my achieving this first position. The roles and responsibilities that I had in this medical writing position, I would work with clinical study protocols and reports for client companies. So the way CROs work is that pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies with new candidate drugs that are looking to seek services and essentially outsourcing the recruitment and the logistics of a clinical trial for the US and the FDA, the US FDA, that's, the 3 phases. So outsourcing kind of those logistics and needs to a CRO, we're the recipient of that. And I reported to that same mentor that gave me the referral. He was the chief medical officer. So I reported to him. I would seek guidance under the senior medical writer in assisting him in kind of reformatting the clinical study reports, which had several graphs and lots of tables, if you will, on data and outcomes and, adverse events and other information pertaining to a clinical trial, an ongoing clinical trial of our client company, usually reformat it based on whoever needs to see it audience-wise, if it's a regulatory entity or if it needs to be put into more palatable presentation. I also worked on requests for proposals where we would reach out to potential clients. I would put together maybe a summary of clinical information on a particular indication that said small company might have a candidate drug for. A lot of the classes that were not maybe regarding direct patient care really primed me for that. This company was right after I got employed. Coincidentally, the company got bought by a bigger company in Japan called Clinical. So a big part of my role for the transition period for a number of months was to reconcile the standard operating procedures for the ones that were existing in the initial company, which is Excelovance, with the larger company that acquired us, which is Clinical. There are some project management roles as well in pharmacy school, and we did have a couple modules on making Gantt charts in Excel, which is a way of depicting kind of the progress and workflow of a number of projects over time. I think this particular slide of medical writing, I would imagine, is the most helpful to you all as students, because at the end of the day, you go to pharmacy school, you've got to get a job, and not only a job, but a job that ideally would provide the benefits and the salary or the money that you need to kind of pay the bills. Resources I recommend and endorse that I actually did not know about during pharmacy school is the American Medical Writers Association. I really, really advocate for that. I would like to see a day in which there are student chapters of the American Medical Writers Association. I think perhaps they're just not there yet. Maybe they're new. If a student group equivalent of AMWA manifested in schools of pharmacy. I think that would help maybe open doors and perhaps mitigate concerns about next steps after graduation and finding fulfilling career paths. This last bullet point, it kind of speaks to the subsequent slides. A part of me wishes I gave this presentation during this time when I was employed with this CRO. When the company got acquired, I was working remotely for a number of months as they were transitioning, as the office in Rockville, Maryland was gradually closing down. And then they reopened at an office in Stuart, Florida. I came to a decision where I either had to move, since my position was not sort of designated as a remote position. I had to move in a very, very short timeline to Stuart, Florida, or separate and arrange a severance agreement. And so that's what I did. And that kind of embarked kind of the time off that I needed. I volunteered for the Andrew Yang 2020 campaign. It was my first time doing anything political. We did what was called canvassing, which is essentially outreach to kind of people in public spaces using like flyers, brochures, business cards, talking to folks about our candidate. Phone banking and text banking, those are that speaks to the role of like sending out the phone calls and text messages, gauging what potential voters are interested in candidate wise. I eventually became the Maryland co-regional organizer for the campaign. I got involved in gathering signatures to get Andrew on the ballot. I met him a few times. What spoke to me in particular was kind of like the meaning of work. I think that was a very eye-catching value and sort of how his proposal spoke to that. As pharmacists, we're learning about patient care and how to promote public health. Andrew Yang would speak about like restructuring the incentive structure, or restructuring like incentives, economic incentives, such that like health and well-being are kind of at the core. But as of now, it's it's like GDP. I think he had a unique take that spoke to me in like a public health interest sort of way. I did get a paid grant to share my mental health story with Andrew himself, his nonprofit, and other affiliates as well. And that mental health story in particular was focused on me experiencing mania, from the sertraline in 2016. I now work part-time for a nonprofit remotely that's called Mudit. Mudit is a South Asian mental health advocacy nonprofit. And that's sort of just kind of keep me busy. I've written one publication for Mudit that opened doors to other publication opportunities. That particular publication was on wellness during the pandemic, as well as wellness and being an advocate overall, and how to balance your own needs while advocating for the needs of others. I wrote an article for the American Society of Pharmacovigilance on medication safety. A quick summary of that. Obviously, sertraline, Zoloft gave me mania. So that's like, I think that would qualify to be written as like a medication allergy, if not prompted explicitly or directly for adverse events. As a patient, at one point, I was prescribed lamotrigine or Lamictal, more connotatively known as like for like anti-seizure properties, but also a mood stabilizer. Unfortunately, I like my entire body broke out in a rash for like a couple of days later after trying that medication. There was a part of me that had this like light bulb go off. It's like, oh, I learned about this in school and I'm experiencing it in real time. This rash, this like body ridden rash. So I had to quickly, take Benadryl to mitigate that. So I talk about those two incidences and more in this article with the American Society of Pharmacovigilance.
So sorry to interrupt you. Are you talking about the Steven Johnson rash?
I don't think my rash was SJS. It was a rash that occurred all over my body, and I took Benadryl to mitigate it. I called my psychiatrist. The rash went away, within like half a day. I don't know that he made a formal, note or diagnosis of my patient is experiencing, SJS. But that question did cross my mind. I just, as a patient, I just don't think it was of that unique
I Googled SJS for a class today, and as soon as you said rash, I was just like, he survived it. So I had to jump in really quickly.
No, exactly. Yeah. I'm glad you asked that, because when I was experiencing this rash, like it was something that was like, at first I thought like, oh, I'm having like dry skin, just like a skin issue. And I would just, I'd take the medication because like, and I wanted the medication to work. It's like, us patients, we don't want to go through the trial and error. Going into it, the assumption is that this one medication, that's prescribed to me will work, and that's done. So I was just kind of like ignoring it in a way. But anyways, nonetheless, like I would characterize it as a severe rash, but not not severe rash. A rash that was severe enough to prompt a phone call to my psychiatrist and have him tell me to stop immediately and take Benadryl, which I did, but not SJS. Yeah.
That's good.
So this last bullet point, the Mighty is a very prestiged platform that advocates for many disease states, many indications. It's headquartered in Burbank, California. I got a writing opportunity for them, so I published an article on mental health and higher education as an Indian American, essentially describing both my undergrad and pharmacy school experiences. My stand-up comedy journey started just after I separated from my medical writing role. I didn't want to start comedy or take a crack at it or like cross it off my bucket list at first open mic. I did not want to start it during school or during my first job, just because I think like pharmacy school and a lot of the life sciences, like it's a stressful, high demand, cognitively high demand thing. And I would worry that if something went wrong at a comedy show, then I wouldn't be able to function properly the following day at work. Comedy, it kind of coincided with my time with the Andrew Yang 2020 campaign. And it started out as this hobby that was secondary to my work in that campaign. And then that flipped essentially, as the campaign wrapped up and concluded. And I would have characterized it as a side hustle to sort of my freelance writing opportunities for groups such as the American Society of Pharmacovigilance and the Mighty. I'm kind of figuring out the next steps and reconciling like what's the future of comedy and work as a whole with like the pandemic and remote work. I'm sort of in this in-between state. Moving forward, I see myself maybe perhaps seeking certification or additional education, maybe from AMWA, the American Medical Writers Association. I see myself in that sort of space, maybe exploring opportunities in industry. I would do it for an entity that I think would have a priority of public health and clinically speaking, mental health. I have an interest in psychiatry. There's also going back to school. I've considered that in more of a full-time capacity, whether it be like an MPH and an MBA of sorts. That has crossed my mind. And so I think that's the end. I can now take more questions. Here's my contact information. Thank you all again. And if there's time after questions, I can maybe tell a few jokes and do some comedy.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. It was great to hear about your journey and everything you've been through. I don't know. I wanted to ask a question. I don't know if anyone else had a question right now. When you talked about Andrew, to meet him, is he down to earth? Is he as down to earth as he seems?
Yes, he is. My pursuit of that campaign, it came from like a space of where I really wanted to do something and dive in and be kind of like unfiltered, I guess. And Andrew, as a really down-to-earth guy, like helped foster that. Especially my mental health issues with the mania occurred in the fall of 2016. And that was 1 or 2 months before, sadly, Trump won the election. But, as someone that was experiencing very severe mental health issues and pharmacy school, there was no time for political or civic engagement. And so I kind of had to put that in the back of my head until I was able to find some time off.
One question that I did have, first of all, I really want to thank you for your level of transparency. That was really enlightening, especially because I saw a lot of similarities between yourself and myself. I actually started seeing a therapist when I left undergrad. I'm actually on alprazolam. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is, I noticed that you said when you were first noticing these side effects, you were just brushing them off to like downplay them. What was the line that was crossed that you said, okay, enough is enough. This is a side effect that I need to kind of get cured for. I need to stop my medication for.
Right. So with the sertraline and the mania, I was acting up in class. I was acting very obnoxiously in class. And I was disruptive, in the classroom. And the latter 2 weeks of September of 2016, it got to a point where I was raising my hand, if not both my hands. It was very obnoxious and I was very ill. Like every 5 minutes to interrupt the the professor. And I guess a part of me is thankful to the extent where I think there was a level of understanding that this student he's ill and he's sort of not just like, he didn't just like wake up and like over halfway through pharmacy school and decide to be very unprofessional. like something, something is wrong. Yeah. Essentially the student like affairs professor, she said, have you been to the counseling center? Because this would be a great time for you to visit the counseling center. I was like, oh yeah, it turns out I have paid them a visit and they prescribed me this medication. I think this is what's causing this behavior. And then she was like, okay, let's like triage this. Like, let's let's get you back to that psychiatrist. And then that psychiatrist had me go to the inpatient psychiatric hospital. So the disruption in class and the very unprofessional behavior, that was just like way out of character. And, you know, yeah.
Thank you so very much.
One more question. Do you have any advice for people who don't know where to go when they're seeing themselves? Because it sounded like you knew how to just seek out help, but what about people who don't know how to seek out help? You know?
Right.
That's a good question, Christine.
Definitely. Yeah. So when I was living on campus, the easiest, most accessible place was the campus counseling center, just from like a sheer walking distance and like walk in type of thing. And like, if they couldn't make an appointment on the spot, then I would know which phone number to call and then just kind of stick out the waiting period. At that time, I was too busy to kind of take the next steps, which would be, I would say, contact your health insurance provider, whatever entity that may be, and they can email you a list of mental health care providers that's covered under their insurance company. That has you like skip this annoying step of like, if you find a provider and they don't either take insurance or use your insurance, then like you may have to try again. So generating that list and then just running the gambit, like going through each phone number, leaving a voicemail, and then playing phone tag until you can get a hold of a provider. And that's kind of the sad reality, I guess, of just the waiting game. That's a part of this ubiquitous lack of adequate, you know, healthcare resources. Seeking advocacy groups and speaking up about your needs. Yeah, it's difficult, but that's my advice.
Thank you. So I know you had some jokes for us. I know we're almost out of time, but right. You could share some with us.
Yeah, so I'll do my best to kind of keep it lighthearted, and let's see how this goes. So what's going on, everybody? My name is Mudit. That's spelled Mudit, but I do not work in IT, despite it being a part of my name. I do not work in IT. I'm actually a pharmacist. I am a pharmacist. I'm a pharmacist, which means because I'm Indian, I'm a cheaper version of my parents' expectations. You know, my parents, they wanted a doctor that writes prescriptions, not takes them. But I told my folks, I do have an MD. I technically have an MD, and it's in my first name. It's just you that got in between the MD. Get it? Mudit. Yeah. I have a couple other jokes about my name. So sometimes my phone autocorrects my name to audit, which is AUDIT. And that's very ironic. Like someone should autocorrect, you know? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the autocorrect team, like the folks that maintain it, like there's probably some Indians in there. Like, let's update it, you know, like let's update. And sometimes my phone autocorrects my name to the word nudity. And you know what? I find that very offensive. Okay. And that's just the naked truth, you know, so frustrating. 2020 is rough. You know, I'm like losing my sense of time. In 2020, like sometimes I shower fully dressed so I can avoid doing laundry, you know, just make it even more efficient. Now my whole wardrobe, like this sweater smells like shampoo, conditioner, body wash, 3-in-1. So, you know, I might get that in mint flavored so I can add toothpaste. That's not a clinical recommendation. Do not do that. Anyone, that's do not advise. Don't put that in the soap note. Do not do that. Oh boy. Yeah. Kids these days, they tell me that they would do anything for clout. And I misheard them. I thought that they said that they would do anything for gout. Like, what? Like, do you need some colchicine? Like, why do you want gout? That's not the flare up. That's not the type of lit that you want. It's not fun. Gout. You know, gout is different from clout. Okay. I was thinking 2020, I hope things get better. You know, it's like, I've taken a number of medications. I have taken alprazolam at a point in my life. I stopped, for anxiety. I hope things don't get so bad where it's like some anti-anxiety medications make it over the counter. You know, that's when things are bad. When it's like, okay, let's just streamline the whole thing. Like, we don't have time to see a psychiatrist. Let's just FDA. Put all the walls down. Let's put the Xanax on the shelf. Like let's say you get knockoff Xanax from or store brand, you know, generic from Target. They'll brand that as Tarzan, you know, That stuff will be so good that I'll want to grow my hair out and, you know, become the medication itself, Tarzan. Oh boy, I remember I was thinking back to pharmacokinetics class, my P2 year. I took PK, pharmacokinetics P2 year. And I had a revelation. I was like, you know, how do we find work-life balance as pharmacists? Then I realized, like, you don't get work-life balance. You get work half-life balance as a pharmacist. You know, that's the more realistic thing. I'll end with this. I have one last joke. So my name is Mudit, and I have a fun way to remember my name. There's a kids movie called Madagascar. Madagascar is from 2006, and they have a theme song. Madagascar is a theme song, and it goes, "I like to mood it, mood it." Thank you, everybody. That is my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Those are so good. That's so good.
All the drugs in there, because the next time I have to take a test, I'm like, what did he say about that alprazolam? I'm like, okay.
I love it.
But thank you for that laugh. I feel like we totally needed it. Thank you, Dr. Verma. Those jokes was like really funny. So I thank you so much for that laugh. It was totally needed, especially within this last week.
Yes, thank you. So thank you everyone who came out from Hampton and obviously Howard for the SNPhA Mental Health Initiatives event with Dr. Verma.
Thank you.
Thank you.